What we have here is a 98 Mazda Millenia with 134,000 on it, automatic V6. Crank. We had bought it with a crank no start problem. The mechanic of the previous owner told her that is the ignition system, and we checked it out. Sure enough, we weren't getting spark to the spark plugs. We checked the fuses and the relays, and they were all good. We checked the power to the ignition module and the coil, and it had power to the ignition module and the coil. I checked the coil resistance, and the coil resistance was in specification. So what we ended up doing was that we put a test light, a spark test light, to the coil itself, and it was blinking. When we put it in between the from the coil wire, it wouldn't blink. So we were wondering what the heck was going on. Because why would cause this is a new cap and rotor. We thought it was the cap and rotor, but it wasn't. You know, this is brand new, and we still weren't getting any spark here, but we were getting spark at the coil. So what it turned out to be was that even though the coil was in specification resistance, what was happening was from when we had the test light here, there wasn't there was enough resistance for the power from the coil to go through the light. But when you have the cap, rotor, and the wires, then there would be too much resistance, and what would happen is the coil would spark through a short inside the coil. So you might be thinking, well, the coil's inside here. Is you have to pay for the whole thing? That's like $400. Well, you don't. All you have to do is go to AutoZone, or we bought our this. We're living in California. We went to O'Reilly, and they had it for the coil by itself for $80. AutoZone, they wanted 110. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna pull the cap and rotor off. Make sure you mark everything because you're gonna need to pull the distributor out to work on it. So mark all your positions, and you're gonna pull the top of off, the cap, rotor, the trigger, and what you'll be left with the ignition module. The ignition module will be glued to the top of the coil with silicone. So all you need to do is be careful, just pry it up, and it should come right up. Then you can have the coil silicone to the distributor, and there's going to be 4 bolts. You just pull those 4 bolts off, and then you pry the coil up, and it'll come off. And it's easy as that. I recommend that if you put it when you put it back together, you put that silicone back on. You scrape off the old one, put new silicone back on, because that keeps the moisture away from the coil, because the coil has exposed metal. We put it back together, and sure enough, it started right up. So if you got your good fuses, you got good relays, you got power to the coil, power to the ignition module, you test the coil with a light and it's blinking, but you get nothing over here, and most likely your coil is bad. If you get nothing at all, and your power is good here, then most likely it's a bad coil. It's really hard to test these things out with the built-in electronics. Uh, so if you're having this issue, a crank no start, no spark, that's key, no spark. And it might be that. If you're not getting another problem, it's hard to test for is you want to see if there's a pulse going to the coil, and you need some fancy equipment for that. Now, if you're getting a pulse here, then that means your crank sensor is working, and the car is telling the car when to fire the spark plugs and the injectors. This is only my case. I had a case where there was a Ford F-150. They worked on it, and nobody could figure out what it was. It's been sitting there for months. One day I went and looked at it, and it turned out just to be the relay for the ignition module. Easy fix, you know. But some of these take a little bit more investigation. So it was the coil. Thank you.